Story 1. North Africa. Men sitting outside, drinking tea and chatting. Women doing housework, preparing food, picking up children from school and carrying all the weight. Story 2. I was in Saudi Arabia for work once, and there was a public execution taking place in a parking lot behind the hotel. It was shocking. Story 3. Savo National Park guest lodge pool sign. No swimming after sunset. I asked why and was told, the cats drink there. At 9 p.m. we looked from the safety of the lodge. The cats were lions and leopards. Story 4. India. All of India. Everything about India. Not being judgmental, just saying it is profoundly different from where I am from. Story 5. Longyearbyen in Spitsbergen. It is forbidden to leave the city without a rifle and authorization because of polar bears. There are beware of polar bear signs everywhere. No guns are allowed inside the market, yet there is a pile of shotguns lying next to the entrance. The school resembles a prison, with iron grids and barbed wire to protect the children from bears. It is forbidden to lock your car or house so that anyone can take refuge in case of a polar bear attack. Have I mentioned the polar bears? Story 6. People take putting trash in the right bins very seriously in Germany. I once saw my landlord picking through my trash and sorting it shortly after I moved in, and I received a stern lecture afterward. I saw him checking a few other times, but I did my best to do it correctly after that. Similarly, in Switzerland, people closely monitor the trash bins for anyone using non-tax bags. I always use the correct ones, but I saw someone else use a normal black trash bag around 10 o'clock at night, and someone started shouting at him from one of the apartments above. I was also quite surprised by how different and more laid-back restaurants are, especially in Switzerland. In the United States, once you are done eating, or even before, they give you the check so they can turn more tables as soon as possible. The first time I went out to eat, I sat with my friend for about 45 minutes before we realized we might have to ask for the bill. Story 7. In Japan, the politeness was a huge culture shock. Bowing instead of shaking hands and handling money with both hands flipped my etiquette expectations upside down. Story 8. When I was a young teenager, my family and 2 other families who were friends with us went on vacation to the United States, to Florida. We're from Germany. My English was as good as could be expected from a 12 or 13-year-old, but surprisingly, I was still the most competent in our travel group. Probably because the adults hadn't had any lessons for decades. I was not prepared for the amount of small talk. Random people chatting with you, the cashier at the supermarket, employees in stores greeting you and asking if they can be of any help. I was already shy, not confident in my language skills, and used to a culture where people generally leave you to your own business. It was normal for teenagers to explore on their own. At that age, I was allowed to take any public transport if I had a valid ticket and just go out and spend my time where I wanted to, as long as I told my parents where I intended to go. Although that wasn't always easy to predict. Once or twice I ended up in an unfamiliar place in the evening, stuck because I missed the last bus, and had to call my parents from a payphone to come and pick me up. Let's just say there weren't many opportunities to explore Florida on my own. I kind of felt like a much younger kid again, always glued to my parents. Plus, the sheer amount of choice in the supermarkets. How do people even get their shopping done in a reasonable amount of time? The time it took us just to check out all the different types of ice cream flavors is probably equal to how long our average weekend shopping trip took back home. If I lived in the United States, I'd be shuffling through aisle after aisle of cereal, starving because I can't make up my mind about what to buy. Story 9. Driving in Dhaka and driving in Naples. I have never been so stressed for different reasons. Story 10. I stayed in a small village in Romania. They had unsegregated bathrooms without stall doors, and the toilets were basically holes in the ground you had to squat over. The streets were cobblestone, and their main transportation was horse-drawn wagons. It was like stepping into the 1800s, but it was 2006. Story 11. In Germany, cars on the Autobahn do not stay in the left lane. They pass and then move to the right, which is excellent. Story 12. China is an obvious choice to pick, but some of the culture shocks were intense as a British person. Particularly noticeable in poorer areas, the big cities, as in all countries, are pristine and presentable. Someone letting their child defecate in the subway beside a bin. Many urinating on the street in the middle of the day. Spitting large spits on the street everywhere. A woman spat on the bus next to me. I really disliked this. People with disfigurements begging. There was a man with a literal white bone sticking out of his stump begging at the side of a busy area. China does not prioritize the health of poor people. A person of short stature entertaining on the street while people pointed and laughed mockingly. Felt like a freak show, and I was very uncomfortable. Being stared at and photographed due to being blonde and white. People from the countryside visiting the city for the first time were amazed by different cultures. One boy literally stopped me and asked in broken English for a photo. He said he was practicing his English. His parents watched from a distance with thumbs up, which was very adorable. Others would just stop and stare at me in the middle of the street, which was quite embarrassing. Poor female farmers in the fields, literally bent in half with a huge curve in their backs from bending over their entire lives. The angle was astonishing. I could go on. I love China. It is now much harder to travel there, so I am glad I went when I had the chance. There are also many amazing areas and lots of lovely people. Like anywhere, there are poor parts and better parts. I hated how they treat poor people. The tourist areas are carefully cleaned and often have guards watching to ensure good behavior, which was unusual. The countryside was beautiful in some parts. Many tourist areas were so crowded that I did not enjoy them much. Story 13. Visiting family in Australia. I'm from the United Kingdom. On the first day we landed, my uncle had a small do-it-yourself job for someone, so I tagged along. We got to the job, and my uncle handed me his car keys and said, "I'm going to be here at least an hour. Take the car and have a drive around the city for a while." Another time, I was driving down the Stuart Highway, and there were dead kangaroos everywhere. Apparently, they walk out in front of the 18-wheelers at night and get hit. My uncle casually said, "If one of them walks out in front of the car, your natural reaction is to swerve. Don't do that because you'll flip the one-ton caravan behind us, and that will flip the car. Just stomp the throttle and hope it doesn't come through the windscreen at you." Also, when driving in the Outback, he would think nothing of driving with a can of beer just casually sitting in the cup holder. Everything about Australians is just so relaxed, with no concerns about anything, but so chilled at the same time. Story 14. About a decade and a half ago, I went to visit my then-boyfriend in Japan, where he was teaching English as part of the Japan exchange and teaching program. He met me at Narita Airport and we took a train to Tokyo. I had a moment of alarm when I saw that many people were wearing masks, thinking there was an epidemic illness spreading in Japan. My boyfriend hadn't told me that wearing masks in public was common if you were concerned about getting sick, or if you were feeling unwell and didn't want to infect others. Story 15. Indian here, moved to the United Kingdom for university. We have a tradition back home where we cut our birthday cake and feed a slice to loved ones. I was celebrating my birthday with friends from all over the world, and my friends looked genuinely confused about why I was trying to put a slice of my birthday cake into their mouths. In the following years, I cut my cake and stood awkwardly after making a slit in the cake, waiting for people to finish singing. Story 16. Japan. Getting on the bus through the back door and paying the fare as you get off. Leaving your suitcases at the busiest train station to buy something in the convenience store and nobody touches them, including security. People reading adult comics on the train, bus, or metro without any fuss. When the line at the convenience store reaches 3 people, another employee opens a new cash register. There is much more. Story 17. Taking a domestic flight in New Zealand, I noticed that when I went to the gate to board my plane, we did not go through any security screening. It was surprising to me that some domestic flights in New Zealand have no security screening. Story 18. Visiting Amsterdam, we were at a ticket counter, and the person behind it would always speak English without us saying a word. What was interesting on the trams was that the announcements were in Dutch, but I think I could work out what en Frankwies is. However, it would always say, "Remember to check out," in English. Story 19. In China, toddlers pee freely on the street, and the urine evaporates very quickly because of the heat. It was quite unusual. Also, in China, People often take pictures of others without asking and sometimes even pose with them, simply because they find them unique. Story 20. I don't know if this counts as abroad, but I was born and raised in Hawaii. The first other state I ever visited was Texas. After we landed, we had to drive 3 hours to our destination and we stopped at a Buc-ee's. That amazed me. It wasn't the huge jerky bar, the fresh brisket sandwiches, or the fact that you could buy basically anything at this gas station. It was the fact that those bathrooms were the cleanest I have ever seen in my life. We have many homeless people and hippies in Hawaii, so anywhere with a public bathroom is just disgusting here. Story 21. Having to dispose of used toilet paper in a garbage bin next to the toilet, as is common in South America. Story 22. American here. Either seeing young children completely naked on a public beach or the fact that water was more expensive than alcohol. Story 23. China. Diaper-aged children wearing chaps without covers are causing disturbances in public places. I am referring to locations such as the Forbidden City, hotel hallways, and streets. Story 24. How personal space is defined varies. In the United States, it is easily the span of your arms. In Germany, it is the distance of your breath. In England, it is how far you can dissociate. Story 25. On the Galapagos Islands, they are very sparsely populated. On the island I was on, Santa Cruz, most of the population lives in one main city. The really nice thing is that this makes it incredibly safe. No one ever locked their bike because there was basically zero bike theft. Even if someone did steal a bike, where would they take it? I suppose all small isolated cities must be like that, but this was my first time seeing it, and it was very refreshing as someone who has lived in or around major cities their whole life. I did get chased by a sea lion, though. Story 26. Food delicatessen of what would be a domestic animal back home, in this case, guinea pigs. Just could not do it. Story 27. Elderly people working in the United States. I was in New York and was served by a waitress who looked to be in her 80s. You do not see that in Spain. Also, a blind man begging in the subway. Here, blind people have a powerful organization called the National Organization of the Spanish Blind, and at a minimum, they can work selling the lottery that funds it. I had never seen a blind or disabled person begging before. Story 28. How shockingly inefficient the work practices of the Japanese are. All my life I grew up being informed how efficient they were, but it is shocking to see how something simple like changing currency becomes like something out of a Monty Python sketch. And do not get me wrong, they are very nice to tourists. Story 29. Cuba. People do not get in a sequential line for things. At a bus stop, for example, whoever arrives asks, "Who is the last one?" The new person will only get on the bus after the person who responded does. It works perfectly. Story 30. Many countries, particularly in Asia, have a much smaller personal comfort space than the United States of America. Strangers think nothing of standing close enough to you that they are touching you. Story 31. As an American who values personal space, I experienced kissing in Belgium. I met a very cute girl, and she just went in for a kiss. I was surprised but admittedly liked it as I got used to it. Story 32. People do not greet each other when they meet or acknowledge my greetings. In my country, no one will talk to or help you without greetings. Story 33. In Scotland, some members of our tour group who were fellow Americans were upset that there were no washcloths in the hotel bathrooms. The tour director explained that washcloths are considered personal items, like a toothbrush. Story 34. I had spent the previous 14 months in Australia and went to Japan for 3 months before returning to Australia. That return to Australia, specifically Sydney, was hard. Everything was loud, obnoxious, and dirty compared to my time in Japan. Took about a week to adjust, but I really disliked Sydney during that first week. Story 35. My Japanese roommate when I studied abroad could not conceive of me wanting to buy multiple days' worth of groceries in one trip. I tried in my best Japanese to explain that I also needed lunch for the next few days, not just ingredients for dinner, but no success. The American in me was used to a large weekly trip in my car, but the Japanese in them was used to a stay-at-home mother making multiple weekly trips on their bike. We never resolved this. Story 36. Israel. Sitting in McDonald's surrounded by people my age, 18 at the time, in Army and Navy uniforms with their guns resting on the table as they ate their burgers and fries, laughing and joking with each other as if they did not have guns half the size of their bodies on the table. Story 37. In Italy, they don't just give you water with meals, you have to ask, and even then, many times they charge you for it. In fact, sometimes if you ask for a glass of tap water, the waiters will simply say no. I learned while I was there that some places may find it rude to ask for tap water. By default, they serve mineral or sparkling water. However, it is still not free in most cases. Story 38. People politely lining up for the bus in London. I live and work in New York, and the scramble to board the bus is something to behold. Story 39. It was many years ago when I was in Italy and encountered squat toilets. I was terrified of wetting my pants, so I would always go very carefully each time. I am now confident using any restroom, proud to say. But at the time, I was miserable. Story 40. We went to Ireland for a vacation. We rented a car, and not 30 minutes later, my dad scraped another car trying to parallel park. We asked someone walking down the street if they knew who owned it. No, should we call the police? No, maybe just ask around. That person walked off. We went into the business the car was parked in front of. No one there knew who owned it either. We left our contact information with a small note saying we would pay for repairs. We never heard back. It was so radically different, and the fact that no one seemed to care at all was very odd to us. Story 41. I visited family in Trinidad a couple of years ago and went to do some food shopping. I spent a long time looking for the milk. I checked every chiller in the shop twice. They only had ultra-high temperature milk. I was very confused. Then it occurred to me that I had not seen any cows. It is a tiny island, and they do not have a dairy industry. Also, the oranges are green. Story 42. Not being expected to tip people for doing the job you are already paying them for is nice when you leave the United States and Canada. On the other hand, we went to a small restaurant in Rome, and the waiter actually expected to be tipped and would hold out his hand after you paid the bill. He was also quite rude. The hostess just shook her head from behind him. Later, we were told that the waiter was just unpleasant. He did not even get our order right. I think to him we were just tourists whose only purpose was to be squeezed for tips. It is unfortunate because that restaurant was right outside the place where we were staying, but we refused to go there after that experience. Story 43. Visiting Japan. I was amazed by the level of politeness and respect in everyday interactions. From bowing to express gratitude to the quietness of public spaces like trains, it was a significant contrast to what I was used to back home. Additionally, the attention to detail and cleanliness everywhere made it feel like a whole different world. Story 44. No toilet seats on any toilets at rest stops I visited on highways. Story 45. As a child, I traveled to Europe and was amazed to see everyone smoking cigarettes everywhere. Story 46. I am from Seattle and thought the Seattle chill was bad. Then I went to Paris. Story 47. Going to Vietnam and seeing a city full of busy rush hour traffic with absolutely no traffic lights, and it all still works perfectly. It actually works better than the traffic in most American cities. Everyone keeps moving and there are no big backups. America says it is the land of freedom, but people are slaves to the traffic light. As an American, I have never felt as free since coming back from Vietnam. Story 48. When I went to Athens, Georgia, United States to visit friends, there was so much space. They took me to a shopping mall, and the parking lot had many empty spaces. It was wonderful. The sidewalks were also very empty because everyone used their cars. This was about 30 years ago. Story 49. Many people in various countries across Europe, especially those near the Mediterranean, eat dinner late. I am British and will never get used to this when visiting, for example, Spain. I understand it is cultural and there is nothing wrong with it, but I can never get used to eating dinner at 9 to 10 p.m. I prefer to eat dinner around 6 to 7 p.m. so I can relax for the rest of the night and then go to sleep. Eating that late often causes indigestion or nausea when trying to sleep. Story 50. The United States of America was a culture shock for my Swedish self. People kept interacting with me everywhere. I could not eat a meal in peace because of the waitstaff, and in stores you were approached way too closely. Even on the street, just waiting for a bus or something. Story 51. I lived in Okinawa, Japan. The shock to me was the number of children walking by themselves, even as young as 4 years old. Story 52. My biggest culture shock was when I went to visit a friend in Morocco. The day I landed in Casablanca was the biggest holiday in the country. I think it is called Eid al-Adha. I made it to my friend's family house, and they had a goat tied up in the backyard. I was very surprised. Then my friend began to tell me why. Suddenly, we started watching the king on television, and he proceeded to sacrifice several goats. Then we went to another friend's building and went to the roof. There, all you could see were hundreds of people on their roofs slaughtering goats, with blood everywhere. It was intense. The atmosphere was shocking and exciting but awkward at the same time. After a while, walking back to my friend's house, you could see people starting fires on the street to burn off the skin from the goat heads they were preparing. Story 53. When I was visiting Dublin, a local coworker introduced me to his girlfriend. They were discussing where we should go for dinner. The man suggested a place and the woman said very casually, "Oh yes, it's great crack." I was trying to think of a polite way to say I don't use drugs when he saw my alarmed but confused face. In Ireland, crack means good fun, he explained. Story 54. In India, people shaking their heads from one side to another means, yes. No offense intended. Story 55. The lack of traffic control in Vietnam results in total free-for-all at every intersection. I was afraid to cross the street by myself. Story 56. The poverty in the few places I have been that were poor is striking. I remember going and having a fancy dinner for 4 with alcohol and dessert, and it came out to $13, and that was a tourist trap. Advertisements for prostitutes in London, like "come upstairs" signs. Ancient plumbing in England, like open hot water tanks in attics, making the water unsafe to drink because rats fall into them and die. Also, squat toilets where there is just a hole and marks for where to put your feet. Waterless toilets high up in the mountains. Not really a cultural thing, but I remember being shocked. Because water pipes would freeze, it is just a toilet lined with a plastic bag, and flushing just runs the bag down and heat seals it. So they end up with a chain of bagged waste. A town with no gas vehicles called Zermatt. I was in Alaska during Fur Rendezvous. I have never seen so many animal skins in my life. A very strange but happy vibe. Many public restrooms in Italy do not have toilet seats. They take normal toilets and remove the seats. This even applies to very fancy places like the Vatican. Train transit in Europe, in the parts one visited, is quite nice. Weaponized incompetence in Italy was surprising. For example, a line of 20 people all wanting the same thing, such as checking in for a flight, but employees act like each person has a unique problem requiring 15-minute conversations on the phone. Feels really strange to see history all around you. The juxtaposition of ancient things and daily life is unusual. For example, whoever rents that little apartment in Rome literally sees the Colosseum outside their window every day. Speaking of Rome, Story 57. Paris has no public restrooms. The curbs are high, so every time I stepped off, I misjudged the height and landed on the street with a thunk. Story 58. The first thing that comes to mind is when I went to the United States. I immediately noticed how hard it is to go anywhere without a car. I don't drive or own a car and have never had a reason to because I have always lived in places with good public transportation. Having a car just seems like extra money and hassle I can do without. I currently live in a city with free public transportation every few minutes, so driving seems pointless. On my first day in the United States, I naively wanted to go for a walk and get a coffee. I looked on Google Maps and saw a street that looked quite close with a Starbucks, a McDonald's, and plenty of other places. In my European mindset, I thought it would be a normal street with a few cafes or maybe an outdoor bar. I ended up walking for miles, with everyone looking at me like I was insane. I got stopped multiple times by strangers asking if I was okay, only to then encounter a lot of drive-thrus on a main road. Not even a Starbucks you could just sit in because they were all drive-thru only. I also found it a bit of a culture shock that what is a daily thing for me, going for a little walk, sitting in a cafe to have coffee and maybe a sweet treat, watching the world go by, sitting in the sun, reading a book or chatting with a friend didn't seem to be a thing. Every time anyone talked about going to get coffee, it was just to go to a drive-through. Story 59. I am currently in Rome on vacation from Maine, United States. Driving in Italy makes driving in New York look like driving in Maine. Story 60. It was actually coming back to the United Kingdom from spending 6 months in Borneo. Everything moved so fast, and I could not understand why. It genuinely took me a month to adjust. Story 61. Florida. The level of obesity is not just over 40 pounds, but more like over 400 pounds. Story 62. That French people are very mean. If you do not speak fluent French, they will ignore you. You cannot speak in English, Spanish, or even use a translator to tell them what you want to say. If you do not speak French yourself, you are not welcome there. Alternatively, they might just have something against Latinos. I do not know. Story 63. By far, the midday rest in Spain. My North American self just could not handle it for the first few weeks. Story 64. I come from a pretty conservative Indian family, and when visiting Switzerland some years ago, I used the sauna only to realize that unisex saunas are a thing. I have never felt so awkward in a room before. Story 65. In India, men frequently urinate in the street, and it is not uncommon to see men and women defecating at the side of the road, even in the city. In New Delhi, cows freely wander along pedestrian malls, eating piles of garbage and leaving piles of manure everywhere. Story 66. In Japan, people claim tables or seats by leaving items such as handkerchiefs or purses to mark them as taken. This surprised me because, in America, those items would be stolen immediately. One person claimed a table by placing their phone and a power bank on it and then walked away. Story 67. Paying to use an automated teller machine. You realize very quickly why the locals do not use them. Story 68. In the United Kingdom and Europe, there are no bidets, so we had to improvise by carrying ketchup bottles filled with water. I am from Saudi Arabia, where bidets are standard in every home and bathroom across the entire country and the Middle East. They are present in bathrooms at homes, schools, malls, restaurants, hospitals, airports, and more. Now that I live in the United Kingdom, it is really challenging to get used to using bathrooms without them. Story 69. People in Thailand and Australia were very kind. They went out of their way to explain where things were and took initiative when they saw me lost on the street. I was honestly shocked. Story 70. Hungarians never smiling in public is interesting. They really put on a stoic performance. Wonderful people, though. Story 71. Ordering a single bottle of beer at a bar, paying with exact cash, and then getting scolded for not tipping. Story 72. Returning to the United States and addressing the lack of walkable cities, fresh foods, and healthcare. Story 73. UK bathrooms with no drain holes in the floor. How am I supposed to do a proper cleaning if I cannot splash water? Story 74. Tanzania has many cinder block houses under construction. Banks do not provide mortgages, so people build until they run out of money, then work to earn more and continue building. Story 75. Mainland Europe's relationship with their government is better. People are not afraid to protest or organize. Mainland Europe has excellent transportation infrastructure. They love to bike, walk, and use trains. In the United States, people just drive everywhere. It is surprising, being charged €80 for a procedure that would have cost $14,000, and having the lady say, "Sorry, it is so expensive." Roundabouts are used instead of stoplights or stop signs. Story 76. Bathrooms in cafes, restaurants, and bars are often poorly maintained. In many cases, there is only one toilet available for a bar that can accommodate 100 people. Story 77. Some stores do not open until noon on Sundays and close early every day. You have to go to many different places to complete one process, such as getting your driver's license. Story 78. Let me preface by saying Costa Rica is awesome, the coolest place I have ever been. They do not really have anything like an interstate highway. The semi-truck drivers are shockingly aggressive there. Do not get me wrong, it must be difficult to do that job on the roads they have, but these drivers are borderline dangerous with their driving. It really made me appreciate the roads back home in the United States. Story 79. I am currently on holiday in New York with my wife. We are amazed and saddened by the number of people wandering around with obvious mental health issues. It seems that on every other street there is someone having an episode. These individuals also seem to be predominantly black men and older white women. Is there no care in the community or mental health support they can access? Story 80. You have heard about the claim that Haitian immigrants eat cats and dogs. In Indonesia, this is true. People there do eat cats, dogs, bats, and some other exotic foods. Only Christian Indonesians do this. The Muslim population does not eat these foods because it is forbidden by their religion. Since Indonesia is a Muslim-majority country and Christians are a minority, you will only see this practice in smaller cities where Christians are the majority. You will not see this in the capital. However, if you go further east, you will find more Christians than Muslims, and you can see them eating these kinds of foods. Story 81. I just came back from my first trip to the United Kingdom from Northern California since 2006. Why do people suddenly dislike full shower doors or curtains? What happened? I seriously could not take a rinse without the room becoming soaked like a Japanese bathhouse. My poor sister could really use an extra drain in the floor. Why? Story 82. Korea. Soap on a stick. Even as a Korean American, it was strange. India. People just throwing trash on the streets, then complaining about the trash. Singapore, very clean. Story 83. In Japan, when it rains, everyone stops what they are doing with transit and waits it out. Story 84. Barking dogs, politeness, and restaurants closing kitchens midday until sunset. I moved to the Silver Coast of Portugal from the United States. Story 85. This is pretty mild, but it is the one that comes to mind right now. In Switzerland, it is expected for you to always gesture thanks to drivers for stopping at the crosswalk to let you cross. Where I am from, drivers are just expected to stop. It is the rules of the road, and we do not think twice about it. As pedestrians, we only wave if drivers go out of their way to make things easier out of courtesy, when they did not have to. But over there, you are expected to gesture thanks no matter what. I had to keep reminding myself about this because if I did not, drivers would just zoom right past me. Story 86. How Europeans speak very bluntly and do not shy away from saying what they are thinking, even if it is rude. I am American. I learned that from studying in Scotland and traveling Europe for a semester and having other European peers. I am very reserved with my words, so much so that multiple Europeans did not realize I was American at first because I am so quiet and do not have the annoying accent. But I seriously could not tell if some people were rude or if it is just the way they express their thoughts. That does not apply to everyone, mostly the French, but other nationalities too. Story 87. Hanoi in Vietnam, about 15 years ago. My first time outside Europe. There were no or very few traffic lights and absolutely chaotic traffic. Crossing the road required placing your trust in the dozens of motorbikes passing at any given moment, watching them move around you like Moses parting the Red Sea. A very surreal experience, but, in hindsight, an incredible one. I am so glad I visited. Story 88. Decades ago, while walking down a residential street in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, a man in a beautiful late-model gold Mercedes got out of the car. Then he lifted his thobe or white dress to show me his private parts. I pulled out a pen and paper to quickly jot down his license plate number. He ran back to the car and sped off. The joke was on him. I do not speak or write Arabic. There were just some squiggles on the paper. Story 89. To my then 10-year-old self, it was being offered the choice of gravy or vinegar as the dip for my French fries while on vacation in Canada. Story 90. Turkey operates bus stations similarly to how the United States operates airports. The Ankara station has 3 levels with escalators and drinking fountains. The Istanbul station has 200 boarding gates and a subway station underneath. In contrast, the Aleppo bus terminal was an unpaved parking lot, probably destroyed by now. Story 91. How few places accept credit cards. You can buy a pack of gum in the United States and charge it. I was in Germany and could not buy a round of drinks. Story 92. No advertising in Cuba, except for occasional propaganda posters. Story 93. My cultural shock when I moved to the United States was the size of the plate with food in restaurants and the amount of choice in the grocery stores. Story 94. Not traveling abroad but going to New York City. The smell and the trash everywhere. I cannot believe New Yorkers just leave their trash in huge bags on the street. There is garbage juice everywhere and it reeks. Story 95. I don't think I will ever be able to get used to not being able to flush toilet paper down the toilet in certain countries like Greece. I understand it is due to old pipes and over time things are being upgraded, so it is becoming more possible. However, having a bin next to the toilet to dispose of used toilet paper is something I always find hard to get used to. It is unpleasant and causes the bathroom and bins to smell bad. Story 96. Traveling in Europe makes you realize that America is not racist at all. Story 97. The environment was amazing. I am American and went to Paris. I envied everything about it. I could not believe how beautiful it was. Everything was fantastic, but after 10 days I had to have McDonald's, and I was not a fast food eater. I just needed something to remind me of home. I also went to the local bakery every morning for bread and saw how packed it was. It was strange seeing so many people just buying loaves of bread for breakfast and not donuts or sweets. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.